Good morning, everyone. My name is Ghancha. Welcome to the podcast of ApexCXO. I have our guest, Mr. Bhowmik Shah, with us. How are you doing, Bhowmik?
Good, Fal. Good morning. Thank you for having me here.
Great. Good to have you hosted, and I'm glad that after many conversation we are meeting today. I'm glad to have you. Let's start with the basic, right? Let's just for our audience to know who is Bhowmik Shah.
Hmm. So, just a normal guy who likes breaking things and understanding how things work, but specifically from a computer's perspective, if I put it that way. That's me. Nothing extraordinary over here.
Why computers?
So I think the phase when you're transitioning from university or you're transitioning to university, I think computers were very new at that time. They sort of opened up a much wider arena for me, and I was always very inquisitive, and when we were in school, I think the trend was to swap pirated video games. I hope
Very
I can say that.
interesting.
And
Okay.
we used to take out hard drives and take hard drives to friends' places because we had floppies at that time. And then that sort of got me interested into how how do these games work and how are we able to actually try things out. And then you sort of go into a rabbit hole. You try and understand how cracks work, where can you download better video games from, which you obviously cannot buy at that time because
Of
they're very
course.
expensive. So you find all of those nooks and crannies on the internet, and that's how it started. And fortunately, I sort of went onto a track where I was more curious about how it works as opposed to how do I profit from it. The profit part came much later
Of course, of
in my
course.
professional journey. But yeah, that's how it all started.
I completely remember and resonate that. Technically, I remember that there was a 56 kbps modem
Modem,
connection.
yes,
It
yes.
used to give like 20, 25 kbps. All
True.
those days, even 56 kbps was a
Huge thing. Yes.
dream. One mail, if that lands in your inbox,
You're
it was
very
a
happy.
huge thing, right? Of
True,
course.
true, true.
I do remember the same conversation we had with my friends that, okay, let's share our movies. अरे मूवी तो दे दो because movies were very I mean MP4 format. I
MP4.
really
Yeah, yeah,
remember
yeah,
those,
yeah.
but I'm glad. Okay, why cybersecurity?
So as I said, once you sort of try and understand the depth with this, so I started my journey as a systems administrator, but what really hooked me was how you were actually able to plug into a program and figure out how it works, right? So one of the very first cracks that I built, okay, was WinZip. If you remember, WinZip still has a shareware screen, so you can use it free of cost. It of course limits the functionality, but at that point in time, there were certain things that I wanted to. I remember I wanted to split a large game file. It was FIFA. The game was
Okay.
FIFA, and I did not have a CD burner, so I couldn't write the game to one CD, and I wanted to split it into multiple zip files so that I could give it to other friends. So I wasn't really selling it for profit, but it was more generosity. But WinZip at that point did not allow you. The free version would not
Yep.
allow you to do that. And what I figured, doing a lot of research at that point was also very difficult. We had no Google. We had Ask Jeeves and Alta Vista and things like that. So you sort of you had bulletin boards, which are like precursors of all your Slack channels and Discord channels, and you hang out on bulletin boards, people host them, and then you interact with somebody and they give you a link, you land upon that link. And I found out that WinZip, the way it works is when you put in a license key, it does a simple comparison. And a certain algorithm, the license key goes through a certain algorithm, and it is matched. If it matches, you've got the license key. And the simplest hack that I did was, instead of A is equal to B, I said A is not equal to B,
Very interesting.
which means the only time WinZip will not work is when you put in a correct license key. everything else would unlock all features, right?
Amazing.
And that was sort of like a turning point. And then I sort of got deeper into understanding Unix, and started reading e-zines, and these are very early days of cybersecurity. So Kevin Mitnick was in the news at that time. So you sort of hold him up to a certain standard, and you try and see what more can you do.
Yeah.
So that's how. And I think I over a period of time I also realized that I've got the knack for it. I can't sit and write code, but I do enjoy breaking things. So that's how I landed up in cybersecurity.
One question for newbie, or let's say someone, a student in college, right? How their journey should look like.
It's different these days because information is democratized. So access to information is much more easier. I think the challenge for a student would be to sift through the tons of information that they have out there and understand what is relevant. I think the basics still matter a lot. You need to understand how networks work, how operating systems work, how infrastructure ties in together, how your how a cloud environment works. So you sort of have to get those basics right, and be inquisitive. I find a lot of students stick to textbooks. They're not willing to explore beyond that. Contributing code on GitHub is good, but you also need to, if you're specifically focusing on cybersecurity, you need to be able to know how to break things. Right? I think that's a very core attribute, and I think that's how they should progress.
So, Bhowmik, a question on your journey. Today, a student is kind of passing or pursuing the college. How similar their journey would be vis-a-vis your journey?
It'll be very different. They have access to a lot more information and a lot more tools. For me, the WinZip trigger would probably manifest itself differently for students these days. When they have access to Chat GPT and Perplexity and Claude and all of that. For them, I think the turning point would probably be using one of these tools to break into a lab, or try and build an exploit locally and work towards it. I think building something yourself and understanding how it works, I think that would be the similarity. Because for me, when I started, we had very limited access to tools. Everything
Correct.
was pretty much open source. Came a little later with a lot of tools. But for today's generation, you've got ChatGPT for free. You've got Perplexity for free.
Correct.
Use those to understand how things would work, and you have TryHackMe's, you have all of these labs available. SANS is coming out with a Christmas challenge. They come out every year. Go have a go at it, and once you transition over, and when you've understood how to read a packet capture, or how do you actually break into an application, or how do you do credential dumping, I think you'll keep coming back for more.
Of course. That's a great thing for a college student. Now let's move to the next topic, right? What is SOC?
Okay, SOC in its true sense, we are talking about a security operations center. So this is your command center for everything related to security within your organization. So in my opinion, your security operations center is the heart and soul of what you're trying to do with information security within your organization, right? So securing information that is relevant and has some financial relevance within your organization, right? So with security operations, you're looking at how will you harden, how will you protect, how will you identify what needs to be protected at what level, how will you test if your controls are good, how will you detect? So you've done all of this, but you still have to be ready for any untoward incident. So how will you detect that something abnormal is happening within your environment, and then how will you respond to it, right? So this entire flow, this entire sequence for me is a SOC, right? In the current day, with the number of silos that we have in cybersecurity, considering the granularity of knowledge and effort required for each area, SOC these days is more the detection side of things. How do you detect threats? How do you detect anomalous behavior? How do you detect suspicious behavior? And you sort of use that to trigger whatever remediation mechanisms you have within your environment.
Very interesting definition. So let's say, let me ask you the same definition 3 times.
Hmm.
What is SOC for a college student?
Okay, what is SOC for a college student?
How do you describe a SOC for a newbie who is not into tech or cyber?
I would call it as your monitoring control room, where you've got multiple CCTV feeds, and you're keeping an eye out on every single feed to see if there's somebody who's not following the rules. So
Okay.
think of it as your traffic monitoring room or your air traffic controllers room. You're trying to understand, if traffic is flowing smoothly, is there an anomaly somewhere? Has somebody taken the wrong way? That's what a SOC is.
Very interesting. And SOC is monitored what, 24/7 or
Yes,
holidays
yes.
or
No, you
holy
have
Diwalis of it?
No, you need to be looking at it round the clock. I mean, you can't, attackers don't take a break. So you don't have the luxury of taking a break.
Of
So you
course,
have
of
to look at it.
So SOC
around
में
the clock.
लोग 24 घंटा काम करते हैं.
हाँ, obviously not one person, but
Okay.
shift में लोग आते जाते रहते.
Oh.
But yes, it is operational continuously.
So from a, let's say, the ATS perspective, the air traffic monitoring system जो plane में होता है and then airport के बाजू में होता है, what it actually does is अगर plane land करता है या take off करता है या जो भी करता है उसको monitoring करता है, right?
हाँ.
How that is comparable with SOC?
Airport पे क्या होता है? You have multiple flights landing and taking off. You also have flights which have to go to the parking bay, which have to go pick up passengers. You have flights which are just dropping off goods. They're not passenger aircraft. Now all of this has to be coordinated. You sort of need to conduct this in a graceful manner without causing incidents, right? So one distinction between a SOC and an air traffic controller's office is that an air traffic controller has to direct things in a certain way. A SOC does not technically have to do that, but a SOC has to do what an ATC does before directing. So they have to make sure, they have to be aware of how many flights are supposed to land, how many of them are passenger aircrafts, are they moving forward, are they going to the parking bay, are they going for maintenance. So they have to keep track of, I have this list of activities that have to happen.
Correct.
Things are happening as per that list. Any deviation from that list is cause for alarm. So you
Correct.
sort of you use that deviation to trigger some sort of a response mechanism to identify, is this deviation a genuine deviation because of something that happened out of everybody's control, or is it something malicious, right? So that's where the alignment between an air traffic controller and a SOC comes in.
What is SOC for a student?
Okay, that's an interesting question. From a student's perspective, a SOC is something which monitors your environment. Think of it as your campus monitoring room, where there are different CCTV cameras placed across the campus. They are monitoring entry and exit points. They're monitoring sensitive areas. And if something weird happens, then they respond to it. That in simple terms, that is what a SOC is, right? From a digital perspective, your SOC is the area which monitors your technology stack. So it could be your web applications, it could be your servers, it could be your end user machines, your firewalls, your switches, and it looks at all the behavior and activity that is happening across this technology stack and tries to identify malicious or suspicious activity and respond to it. So that's what a SOC is.
That's an interesting answer. How do you explain SOC for a technologist or a cybersecurity personality?
Sure. Okay. Now we're switching gears. So for a person who is well versed with technology, your security operations center is the nerve center of your defense and response to threat actors.
Okay.
What you are as a cybersecurity professional, your primary aim is to ensure that your organization's digital assets are protected from external attacks or internal attacks, right? And you may have intellectual property, you may have customer data, you may have a lot of sensitive information, transactional information which you want to protect. Your SOC helps you in identifying, it helps you in monitoring what is happening. Once you start monitoring, it helps you detect something anomalous happening in your environment. Once something anomalous triggers, you have to investigate. You have to actually ensure that you know whether this is a true positive or you're going on a wild goose chase, and then it turns out that it's not really relevant and it's not malicious. And once you've qualified it as a true positive, then you need to respond, because you don't just want to sit and say, I've detected something, I've identified that it's a true positive. You actually want to ensure that it does not propagate within your environment. You limit the damage, you contain it, and then you recover from it, right? So that's what a SOC helps from a technologist's perspective.
That's interesting. Isn't it true that okay, SOC is finding a needle in haystack?
Absolutely. Very, very well put. So because for any kind of an organization these days, the technology landscape is so large. You for even a small to a mid-sized organization, you will have some form of an HR system. You will have some sort of, you'll probably be using email online, so you'll have Google or Office 365. Then you'll have your CRM. You'll probably have website which is hosted on a content management system. Then you will have your internal office environment where you may have different networks. You'll have access points. You have users or end users who are using desktops, laptops, tablets, mobile phones. So your entire infrastructure is so vast, and the amount of activity today, I would say 90% of our lives are online, right?
Correct.
Professional lives, more than that.
I
Personal also, sadly, we spend a lot of time online, but professionally, you can't get away from a computer unless you're like a carpenter or something. You have to spend 8 to 9 hours a day in front of your screen. Every single activity that you do, whether it is opening a web browser, checking an email, downloading something from the internet, making a payment online, every single activity generates an audit trail. It generates an entry called a log, which documents what happened. It says from this particular location, this particular browser, this particular user carried out this activity. That is what flows into a SOC, right? Now imagine you have 50 users, 8 hours a day on the computer doing activities like these. They're going to generate a huge volume of data. What you're really looking for is that one piece of information which probably indicates somebody is trying to do something malicious in your environment. So I would say it's not like looking for a needle in a haystack. It's like looking for a needle in multiple haystacks.
Of course, of course. And don't you think so? This generation of the logs are too much. How do you narrow down? Because see, as a professional, if you generate like billions logs a day, I mean, it will be next to impossible even to identify an attacker, right? How do you ensure that okay, you tone down these logs to the most viable or useful logs for your monitoring?
Very, that's a very tricky question. Okay, so there are ways to do that, but there's no way around it. Your environment is going to generate a lot of logs. Your efficiency or your ability to detect such activities will not come from spending too much time trying to reduce logs. That's a classic mistake that we see organizations try and make. What organizations or you as a security professional want to focus on is, how do I ensure that I have visibility into what I'm capturing in terms of understanding malicious behavior, right? Think like an attacker. What an attacker is not worried about triggering a failed login attempt, right? An attacker is looking at the entire flow. So SOC typically suffers from trying to silo out activities, and then you get single alerts. If hash is equal to X, raise an alert, or if activity is equal to Y, raise an alert, or if threshold greater than Z, raise an alert, right? But it's not these isolated things which lead up to an incident. It's basically, think of it like the domino effect. You've got a chain of dominoes standing. One small domino falls and it sort of takes the whole stack down, right?
Correct.
So you sort of want to be able to identify each domino and you want to be able to chain it together, right? So don't spend too much time focusing on trying to reduce logs, but look at how can you use all of this to leverage the technology that you have at your hand, right? If you've got volume in terms of data, use machine learning, right? Machine learning helps you create baseline patterns for behavior within your environment. Volume gives you an understanding of what your user behavior is, what your server behavior is. Use that, leverage that to actually identify campaigns, not individual alerts. And I think that's one of the pain points that current generation SOC environments suffer from. Volume is you can't really escape from volume these days.
So let's say if an organization wants to implement SOC, and if I give you two classic scenarios, let's say we only integrate the logs which are important, and then we figure out a way to integrate. Or the other option is we integrate everything, have the logs, and then figure out which is important for you or not. Which option you feel is more?
Neither, actually.
Okay.
Right. So let me clarify, because I think that what you mentioned is a classic approach at how do I maximize ROI on the investment. I'm investing in a SOC or a SIM tool or a SOC service provider. I want to ensure that I have visibility ASAP.
Correct.
And I want to be able to go back to my board and give them the assurance that, look, we've got something in place, right? The correct way to do it, if you don't want to be drowning in a sea of logs, is start off with threat modeling.
Okay, interesting.
Okay, understand. So threat modeling, let me break it down. What threat modeling does is it helps you understand what your attack surface area is, right? So from an external attacker and from an internal attacker as well. What you want to know is, if somebody is targeting your organization from outside, what is the potential attack surface area that is visible to them? Do you have that attack surface area integrated with your SOC? What sort of logging capabilities do you have over there? And what is an attacker's pathway from outside the environment to your crown jewels?
Okay.
Chart that out at each layer, identify what are you able to log and what you're not able to log. Work very closely with your SOC team or your SOC partner to understand what will really help them detect malicious activity without generating noise, and then work with integration. So this is like that story that's there. If I forget who it is credited to, but if I had to cut a tree in 5 hours, I would spend 4 hours sharpening my axe.
Very
right?
interesting.
So threat modeling is that sharpening. It gives your team clarity into what they're trying to protect and what they're trying to detect, right? So that's my suggestion would be to start off with threat modeling.
Threat modeling. That's a great example, and that's how CyberNX does that.
We do, yes.
Okay, very interesting. I think I like that answer.
So to sort of round it off and to summarize what I just explained, the way you should go about implementing a SOC, or the way we at CyberNX implement a SOC or onboard somebody into a SOC, is we start off with a threat modeling activity, which is nothing but identifying what my strengths are, what my weaknesses are, and what is my attack surface area.
Sure.
What visibility do I want? Once I have this, we map it to the log sources that are available. Right. So a lot of times what will happen is your SaaS platforms may not be able to give you logs. So there's a gap. Now imagine you have a SaaS platform, which is a third-party platform where you're doing KYC validation. Now how do you ensure visibility with it? So at least you're aware that there's a gap. So you identify what your attack surface area is, identify the log sources, integrate those log sources in the right manner. Right. So you don't want debug logging enabled. You don't want, say for example, HTTP access log and error logs, because they fill a part of the puzzle but not the whole puzzle. You actually want application audit logs. Your threat modeling will sort of bubble all of this up to the top. It'll give you more clarity into what you're integrating. It'll also give you better control over how much log volume your environment is generating. Once you have everything integrated, then work on detection engineering. So you want to build rules which align to your business risk.
Interesting.
right? And then you've got a SOC which can sort of hit the ground running and start delivering value from maybe not day one, but at least week one.
Interesting. That's a good summary. Thank you, Bhowmik. Okay, let's talk now on the definition. What is XDR and what is MDR?
Jargon, if I put it that way. But no. So let me first explain what the terms mean before I go into the definition. So MDR is managed detection and response. XDR is extended detection and response. But the simplest difference between the two is that your managed detection. So both of them rely on agents. Right? So you have agents which are deployed within your environments, on servers, on end user machines, on laptops, and those agents monitor for certain kinds of behavior. Now you have signatures, you have rules, you have classic behavioral analysis. All of these agents, they identify anomalies over here and they send a trigger out to some form of automated containment or response mechanism. Right? That automated response differentiates an MDR and an XDR. Your MDR is primarily looking at things and flagging it as suspicious or non-suspicious. Your XDR takes it a step forward and says, this is suspicious. I'm going to put in some amount of containment in place before somebody can come in and validate this effectively, right? So it sort of helps you speed up that journey where you don't have to wait for somebody to actually come in and take a look at it and react to it, right? So that's, in a nutshell, that's MDR versus XDR.
And any SOC scenario, these two are important components?
Yes, because with once your MDR, because they have this spread, so they already have a presence on every single endpoint in your environment. So they have access to telemetry, behavioral telemetry that happens on end user devices, and they are the ones who will be shipping all of this information into your SOC. Right now, you still have a large number of elements which are not agent driven. Think network devices, think your cloud environment, think your SaaS, your web applications. All of these places, agents will not cover.
Yep.
So if you want to build an attack chain, if you want to do correlation, then your MDR logs or telemetry actually fill a very important gap in helping you understand the flow or attack path for something that's happening in your environment. So they play a very important role when they're shipping telemetry into the SOC, and you sort of get to see everything in a single unified screen.
So Bhowmik, I have a very basic question. If I were to implement SOC for a manufacturing or a financial company, what are those bare minimum components are required to start the SOC?
If you were just starting your SOC journey, okay, and this is very relevant, right? So it's a very pertinent question in that sense. So if you're starting your SOC journey, what you really want, absolute basics, you want to know your inventory. What is the lay of the land within your organization? How many servers? How many end users? What's your application landscape? Things like that. All of these have to be able to generate logs and ship logs. Now you need some sort of a log aggregation engine, right? So that's where your SIM comes in. So you will need a SIM tool, and once you have your asset inventory, your SIM tool, then you start doing threat modeling. So you get all of this. You have logs, and threat modeling will give you an understanding of what you should be monitoring, right? And that, and you've got a basic SOC up and running.
Interesting. So three major components: the asset inventory, the SIM engine, right, and your monitoring services. So this completes the entire SOC.
This gets you started on your journey.
Okay, interesting. Now let me ask you this: I've implemented SOC. My partner is managing that. I don't really know the technicalities of the SOC. What is advanced next generation SOC?
Levels of maturity.
Okay.
So when you talk about next generation or advanced SOC, it's nothing but evolution in terms of your organizational environment, your team's capability and maturity, and your expectations from what you expect out of it. So on top of your detection layer, which we just spoke about, where we have your asset inventory, we've got your SIM engine, and you've got your monitoring services, there's a lot more refinement that you can do. What we spoke about just stops the SOC at being a detection service. It'll trigger an alert and then somebody will have to intervene to contain it. You have automated response. So if you were to start off, into your evolution from a basic SOC to a next generation SOC, first look at automated response.
Okay.
In addition to that, you can look at detection engineering. So detection engineering is a very critical component. When you start off with a basic SOC, you've got a stock set of cookie cutter rules which come out of the box, which will trigger. So user login, user logout, failed logins, multiple failed logins, things like that, right? They may or may not be relevant, right? But they don't really create the chain that you want, when you're trying to identify an attack. Your detection engineering does that. Your detection engineering helps you understand what sort of campaigns you want to detect. So you're not looking at alerts, you're looking at campaigns. For example, data exfiltration, ransomware, right? So if I go and ask somebody that, is your SOC capable of identifying a ransomware attack in the early stages, they're not sure. Because what is happening internally in their mind when I ask the question is they're piecing together, do I have my MDR agent on the endpoint? Do I have an email gateway which will detect somebody downloading a malicious attachment? Then they open the attachment, the endpoint agent sort of detects that it's doing something funny and blocks it. That alert comes into my SOC. So can I detect ransomware? Probably not. Or maybe, I don't know. I've never evaluated this. But your detection engineering will actually build this campaign. So you will take this up as a scenario. You will create the flow where you have visibility, logs coming in from your email gateway to your end user devices, to your EDR. All of them will flow into your SOC, and you will be able to chain this together. And to close off the loop, you actually do a dry run and test it out. You don't do that in your basic SOC, right? So there's I'll come back to automated response, but this is detection engineering. Then you want to look for the dormant threats, which is more popularly known as APT, Advanced Persistent Threats. Now, typically what happens is a smart attacker will not do a hit and run, which means they will not compromise an environment, be opportunistic about what they can steal, and quickly walk away. A smart attacker will sort of rely on their skills to understand what they have managed to compromise. If they are a very smart attacker, they would have done their homework. They would have understood the organization that they're targeting. And once they are in, they'll maintain access, persistence, right? And this can stay in your environment for a very long time. If you recall some of the more prominent attacks that we heard about, in fact, I think the most recent one was the Jaguar Land Rover attack that we read about. And I think top of my head, I believe it was the attackers had been within the environment for at least 6 months before they were detected.
6 months?
That's very less. Typically,
really?
you would have attackers sitting in your environment anywhere between 18 to 24 months.
Wow, this is a really long period.
It's a very long period. And attackers are smart, right?
Yeah.
So it's not just, they don't just stop at getting data from your environment or stealing something or hitting your environment with ransomware. These days, what attackers do is, if they have access but they're not able to find anything, they lease out compute.
Wow.
I have access to 50 different end user machines within your environment.
Okay.
That's compute.
Right.
I can use it for Bitcoin mining. I can use it as a part of a botnet. I can use it for a DDoS attack. There's a whole bunch of things, right? So we've reached a stage where attackers are not just looking at what is present on the machine, but they're actually looking at the power that is present with the machine, right?
Wow.
Now, these kind of attackers, they don't make a lot of noise. So your advanced persistent threats, these are advanced attackers who've got remote access. They're persistent. They're not just, running around your environment. They're lying low until something comes up, and they are relevant threats. A SOC will typically not pick this up. Your basic foundational SOC will not pick this up. What you want to do is you actually want to go back and look at historical data, say 60 days, 90 days, because these compromised machines or APTs will actually send out some sort of a heartbeat, some sort of a ping. There would be some sort of a keep alive, that goes back and forth.
Of course.
That is what you want to pick up, So your threat hunting will help you with all of this. So you want to go back and do threat hunting, right? So a true advanced SOC, to sort of wrap up, will look at threat hunting and detection engineering and complement this with automated response. That is where your SOAR kicks in. So your SOAR will actually have predefined playbooks, which are no-code, low-code playbooks, but they plug into different security controls that you have within your environment. Something as simple as adding an IP address to a firewall blacklist, which means no traffic can come in or go out to that particular IP.
Those are rules, right?
Those are playbooks. So depending on if an IP address shows up in an IOC list and it's in the middle of the night and you don't have anybody, you have an automated playbook which will trigger, and it will actually go and modify the rule in the firewall and say add this IP address to the blacklist.
Very interesting,
right? So there's another example where you can look at, let's say somebody creates a cloud storage bucket, which is public, but the organizational policy says that no public buckets are allowed. All buckets created will be private by default. You need explicit approval to make a bucket public. Now, if somebody creates a public bucket on Christmas Eve, where you're already running on a very lean team, then do you want to wait until somebody comes back on the 27th or 28th of December or 2nd of January and then looks at what happens? Or you want to have some sort of automated rule which says a new bucket has been created or a bucket has been modified to make it public. I am going to remove that permission and send an alert.
Very interesting.
So that's where you move on to the next generation of SOC, where your intervention is basically just checking. You're not really, responding actively to a large part of the threat.
So that's a great explanation of SOC and advanced SOC. Now let me summarize for everyone. The typical SOC implementation needs asset reconciliation, asset register, and includes threat modeling just to ensure that the assets are rightly mapped. B, you need a SIM engine, right, which will create rules and make the rules so that right alerts are triggered in a more protocol based. Third, you need a 24/7 monitoring tool. Absolutely. Which will monitor all this jargons and then give you the right output. Is my understanding correct?
Correct.
Great. Now let's come to the advanced SOC. So the typical SOC plus you have threat hunting, which will also have APT, advanced persistent threat, what you mentioned. Plus you have SOAR, so that at a maturity level, you actually do a remediation of the alerts on an automated fashion.
Absolutely, yes.
Right?
Yes.
Did I miss anything? SOC and advanced SOC. Okay, great. Now, for our understanding, what is SOAR? Right? SOAR is a great word, but can we talk about the definition and how it works?
Good. This gives me an opportunity to sort of demystify. SOAR, which is security orchestration and automated response, is a way to respond to alerts in an automated manner.
Okay.
Right? In absolute layman terms or technical layman terms, SOAR is a set of scripts.
Okay.
Now, obviously that's absolutely basic, but there's a lot of finesse and value add that SOAR brings in. But at its core, what SOAR does is it runs a set of commands based on some sort of an input, right? In the SOC sense of things, the input is typically a validated alert. So, for example, if you have the example that I gave about somebody creating a public cloud bucket, that would be an input that goes into the SOAR. The SOAR will identify that I have a corresponding playbook for this exact scenario, and the playbook will have steps that go identify the bucket, check out the region the bucket is in, remove the policy which actually makes it public, and send an alert out to the relevant team member.
Interesting.
Right? Now, typically in absence of SOAR, you would have to rely on a human team member to actually do all of these, which means your response time or your containment time is longer. So that means your risk exposure is much longer. SOAR steps in and helps you reduce your risk exposure. So at least you mitigate something immediately until somebody can come in and validate and make sure whether it was genuinely required or not required, right? So that's what a SOAR is in the
And
SOC.
is SOAR a journey or it's a day one thing?
No, it's a journey.
Okay.
Very, very good question. You do not want to do automated response from day one. You
Okay.
want to create a baseline for your environment. You want your teams to get comfortable that what is your SOC doing, and get to a stage where you are comfortable with the quality of alerts that are coming out.
Correct.
Because otherwise what happens is, if you've got a very high level of false positives coming out, then you're basically handing over a lot of false positive to your SOAR, which will go and start making changes in your environment left, right, and center. Right? So you don't want to do that from day one. Go through the journey where you start off with a basic SOC, okay, or you start off with an advanced SOC. The moment you go for an advanced SOC, you have to, you can't bypass the basic SOC. You still have to do the basic SOC,
Yes.
right? So you get that out of the way. Once you've got everything integrated and you've got monitoring in place, monitor it for 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, based on your comfort level. You'll get a sense of, how your environment is behaving, and then start off on your SOAR journey. Don't make the mistake of starting off on SOAR from day one.
That's very interesting. So SOAR is not a typical detection component. It's not a component which you may need on a day one.
Correct.
But it's a maturity model where you feel that, okay, now the SOC and typical threat modeling and 24/7 monitoring is started. Then you actually add on a maturity level the SOAR capabilities.
Absolutely.
And then you also make some rules for SOAR, right? So let's say, for example, it will only remediate, let's say, firewall alerts to start with. And
Correct.
eventually, let's say, for example, classic example of saying, okay, you've got 50 hits from an IP. Technically, SOAR will say, okay, anything beyond like 50, just block it. Right? That's a one.
You create a threshold, and you can say beyond the threshold, take certain action.
Correct. So that's a classic use case.
That's
of
a classic
SOAR.
use case. Yes.
Nice. And SOAR is, of course, a journey, right? I mean, you keep on adding the rules.
As
for
you
your
evolve,
customer.
as your landscape changes, you keep adding. As you identify assets which open themselves up to automated response. You do need an asset to be able to support. Sending instructions to it via scripts. So once you it's a journey. I mean, you keep adding more SOAR playbooks as you start getting more confidence in your existing SOAR playbooks, and you identify use cases where you want automated response as the first step of containment.
Very interesting. I think आपने एक definition miss करे SIM नहीं. Okay, so
yes,
let's
yes.
talk about that.
हाँ.
You know the definition, right? I mean, okay. So Bhowmik, let me ask you. You've used the word SIM a lot. What is SIM?
Good question to sort of lay the foundation. A security incident and event management tool is an advanced log aggregation engine, right?
Okay.
Think of it as a place where logs from a variety of different devices come in and aggregate. They sort of come in and fall into line in a way that lends itself for somebody to take a look at it and analyze it, right? So it's not just a collector. So it's not just you have all logs which come in and land in a certain place, but then an SIM actually gives you more features where each log is broken up into key value pairs. So you will have the date and time of that particular activity mapped to timestamp. Then you will have hostname mapped to hostname, IP address mapped to IP address. This makes it easier to play around with the data. That lends itself to creating rules depending on the kind of a rule engine you have, right? So your SIM actually adds all of this together and gives you a unified console. Of course, there's going to be reporting features and all. So your security incident and event management tool is basically the engine which will support your security monitoring, your automated response, your threat detection, and all of that. In absence of that, you're going to have people looking at individual consoles, somebody looking at your email, somebody looking at your antivirus, somebody looking at your firewall, and they'll probably be working in silos. So that's what an SIEM is.
So that has to be robust. That's a central nerve system or the entire security operations center, correct?
Correct.
Very interesting.
So you need to figure out, do you what is the volume of logs that you're going to generate. So
Sure.
there are ways that you can understand that from your environment. You also need to understand what happens if your SIEM goes down.
Okay.
A classic case is, let's say you are working for an organization which sees surges in data being generated.
Mhm.
Is your SIEM capable of handling those surges? Say, for example, one day your log volume is X, and suddenly you launch a campaign or something, and your log volume shoots up to 3x or 5x. Right? Is your SIEM capable of handling that? Do you have different environments? Let's say classic cases, you have your production and you have your DR environment. Right now, ideally you have to be monitoring both. Right, what happens if your production goes down? Do you have an equivalent SIEM environment within your DR setup, or does your SIEM spread to an active or an active passive kind of a layout,
A redundancy.
which supports monitoring in absence of the primary environment going down?
Very interesting.
Right, so it has to be very robust.
So even SIM tool needs a redundancy, an
Yes.
active kind of environment where you ship the logs from primary to secondary and whatever it takes for you to run the show.
Correct.
Correct. Now we have learned that what is SOC, what it takes for us to implement the SOC, what is advanced SOC, and what it takes for you to implement and come to a maturity level. And let's say you've gone through the journey of, let's say, 2 years, and then you are at a stage where, okay, your SOC, SIM, everything is like set and running, up and running, but everything is green, right? Everything is working the way it is expected. Your SOC monitoring tools are giving green results, but you still feel that the SOC is blind. Why?
So interestingly, what happens with a SOC these days is, generally a SOC's efficacy is measured in terms of SLAs, mean time to detect, number of tickets closed, number of alerts generated. These don't really translate into giving you visibility into your threats. Eventually, what happens is that your SOC becomes a number game, right? And your analysts get into a comfort zone where they understand what is expected on the screen, and the system sort of gets gamed to show you that, right? It's not about intent. It is about a lot of different things, but primary among them being alert fatigue,
Okay.
because you have so many logs being generated. You most likely have a very robust library of rules which cover every scenario, including the ones which may not apply to you. Right, so you've got a whole bunch of different things triggering, and your analysts sort of get into a groove where they know what is a false positive. Right, first time something triggers, it gets sent out as an alert. Somebody comes back and says this is linked to regular activity, you can close this. Let's assume this happens 3 times or 5 times. Right, the 6th time, the analyst will be like, I know this is going to be a regular activity. I'm going to downgrade it, or I will sort of drop it and not send it out. Right? That one mistake proves to be costly. Right? So your SOC is looking in terms of alerts, not campaigns. And that is why a green dashboard does not technically equate to a secure environment. Now that's a very inflammatory statement, if I could put it that way. But that is the on-ground reality.
Very interesting. Now, what do we do, and to take this discussion further, to see whether my SOC is working fine or no? What are those standard way of doing it?
How do you measure if your SOC is effective or not? So even if you feel everything is green, you still need to stress test. Right? You have to poke and prod your SOC or poke and prod your environment to understand, is your SOC reacting the way it should react? Right? It is think of it as a when you go to a doctor's clinic, and you say something feels off, even though there's no obvious indicators, they'll probably take that rubber hammer and sort of bump you on the knee to see if your knee reacts the way it's supposed to do. That's what you need to do with your SOC. So either you do some sort of attack simulations, or you do offensive test activities, red teams. Those are the kind of activities that you want to use to stress test your SOC and see if it is behaving the way it is supposed to, or the way you expect it to behave.
So to summarize, what you're saying is to see the effectiveness of my SOC, I do stress testing. I do all the ways of ensuring that the logs are rightly monitored and being handled, right? Now, how do you challenge SOC, right? What are the ways to see that your SOC is effectively working and protecting you from an attacker? What are the ways for that?
Mimic an attacker.
Okay.
If you want to see whether your SOC is doing what it is supposed to do, pretend to be an attacker and see how it responds or how it reacts. Right? Now, what does that mean? It does not mean that you carry out a vulnerability assessment or a penetration test activity. You actually try and breach into your environment
Okay.
to see if your SOC picks up things where it is supposed to, it triggers where it is supposed to actually identify suspicious activity, it sends out the right alerts, your team responds in the right manner. Right? Once your team gets into a comfort zone or into a groove, they'll probably be very hesitant to respond, because there's a fear that what if this is a false positive. I don't want to end up looking like a fool, where I overreact to something when it just turns out to be normal, and you don't want that with a SOC team. So carry out red teaming activities, carry out attack simulations. Those are the only ways that you can actually gauge whether your SOC is doing what it is supposed to do and the people manning the SOC are doing what they're supposed to do.
Very interesting. That brings to the topic of red teaming. Why red teaming?
Red teaming effectively helps you get as close to attacker behavior as you can without harming your environment. It is a think of it as a controlled explosion. You're trying to break down a building. You can go about it in a variety of different ways, but if you are smart about it, you will place explosives in the right places and control the way the building comes down, so you don't damage the parcel of land, you don't cause a lot of disturbance to buildings around it, and you achieve your objective. Right? That is what a red teaming helps you do.
Very interesting. Can you define a term what is offensive and what is defensive?
Sure. Again, tricky but very interesting. But it is important to sort of put it into context, because as defenders or as cybersecurity professionals, the general perception is that we are in charge of protecting. We are the guards, right? And that sort of, in a very subtle way, that takes shape in your mind, where we tend to believe that we only have to protect, right? And what we do not realize is that there comes a time where we need to know what an attacker is up to, right? Let me give an example. In times of war, they say, what we've spoken about so far is know yourself. Right? Know your asset inventory, know your attack surface area, know your threat profile, but it is also extremely important to know your enemy. Right?
Okay.
So when you do offensive activities, you're basically mimicking your enemy, mimicking a threat actor, mimicking what they will do to identify vulnerabilities in your environment, to exploit those vulnerabilities, to come into your environment, and what will they try and take from your environment. Right? You're putting it into business context, where an offensive activity really brings to the top what impacts your business. Is it data loss? Is it productivity loss? Is it reputation loss? We talk about all of these terms in board meetings, but how do you actually quantify them on the ground and have it make sense for your teams? Is by doing offensive activities.
Very
Right?
interesting. So when you term both offensive and defensive, um, do you measure them as well on ongoing basis? That okay, what are the offensive activities you have done, or what kind of defensive activities you have done?
We should.
Okay.
We should measure them because that helps you chart out your maturity journey. So CISOs typically tend to spend a lot of time figuring out what their annual roadmap is going to be, what areas or layers are they going to focus on in terms of evolving to the next level. Now, how do you actually prove that? Is by measuring what you're doing, or showcasing a before and after picture. And you can't do a before and after if you haven't measured. You don't have metrics to compare with. So you should measure what sort of defensive activities you're doing as a part of your normal information security roadmap. You should also measure what type of offensive activities do you have in store for maturing your environment.
For a layman or for a person who is entering into cybersecurity, right? These jargons, the big jargons of vulnerability assessment, red teaming, blue teaming, and all those are like very difficult to understand, right? Can we go back on the surface and see what is actually vulnerability assessment and penetration testing?
Good point and good question, because one of my pet peeves is when I'm talking to somebody and they say I want to do a VAPT, and it irks me a lot because VA and PT are two very distinct separate activities. You can do them together, but you have to put it into context. So I think it's good that we put some foundation to this. So VA, which is a vulnerability assessment, is primarily carried out. It's a passive activity. It is not invasive. It is carried out to identify if a particular digital asset is configured in the right manner. It has no weaknesses, no known weaknesses that we are aware of, and it is within the bounds of what is expected from an organization perspective, right? So the important things to remember over here for a VAR: it is non-invasive, it is passive, and it is basically just matching if your configuration aligns with the baseline.
Okay.
Right? A penetration test typically takes a vulnerability assessment one step forward. Right?
Okay.
So with a vulnerability assessment, you're just validating whether something exists or not in terms of a vulnerability, right, or a weakness. A penetration test actually tries to poke that vulnerability to see if you can do something with it, right?
Okay.
But there is a very, very subtle distinction when we talk about the next level after penetration test. So penetration test will actually say this vulnerability exists. Can I do something to showcase that there is potential for exploitation?
Interesting.
A simple example is a cross-site scripting attack that is possible on a web application. A penetration test will say, okay, I found a particular variable which is vulnerable to cross-site scripting, which is basically I can use that variable to inject a script, and they will show a POC as maybe a pop-up which says, XSS alert or something like that, but it stops there. So I would call a penetration test as partially invasive as opposed to completely non-invasive, which is a vulnerability assessment. But that is where a penetration test goes, right? Beyond this, we have red teaming. Red teaming is when we actually take a vulnerability to the extent possible. Can we exploit it? So can I use a cross-site scripting attack to actually steal a cookie from a browser?
Okay.
Or can I actually leverage a vulnerability into SSH or RDP to gain access to a remote system, carry out privilege escalation, and create persistence on a system over there? So that's where. So it's increasing levels of complexity when we talk about a vulnerability assessment, where you will also have things like you have a configuration assessment or a hardening assessment. So all of that gets clubbed together with a VA. Then you do a penetration test activity where you say, look, I've got my VA cleared. I've identified weaknesses. I've fixed them. Now I want to know what more can be done. So that's
Sure.
when you do a penetration test. Right?
Interesting.
You fix findings from a penetration test. Now you're at a stage where you want to really understand, I believe I've done whatever I could, right? What can an attacker do now? That is when you step into the realm of red teaming and really try and hit your environment with true offensive activities.
Very interesting. So we close the chapter of VA and PT. Vulnerability assessment, to summarize, is more like identifying the gaps from a vulnerability perspective, from a perspective of, let's say, if there is a patch missing, if
Missing
there is a
patches.
configuration missing, and everything, is entirely, I will say, non-intrusive activity. Right, doesn't impact the ecosystem. Penetration testing is more way of exploiting a vulnerability to see whether that vulnerability is really exploitable, whether an attacker can go further and really take down your system, right? That's a penetration testing. Now let's understand, okay, what is red teaming, blue teaming, purple teaming. I don't know
Sure.
what colors, who choose these colors,
Sure.
but let's define, or let's understand for our audience that, okay, what is the terminology and difference between them.
Sure. So let me start with blue teaming. The correct order, in my opinion, is blue, red, and purple.
Okay.
Right. So, but it's not linear. You sort of pick and choose. But blue teaming is primarily the defensive side of things, where what you're looking at is what is your environment and what is the baseline protection that you need to put in place, right? So what should be your configuration, what should be your policy, what should be your patch levels that you maintain, how do you do access control. So your blue team defines all of this, implements all of this, and validates that it has been implemented.
Okay.
Right. The next step forward is I've done my homework. I've identified what needs to be implemented. I've implemented it. I've put it in place. I've validated that it is implemented, and I'm confident of that. Now I want somebody to come in and reconfirm that what I have tested is fine. That is where a red team comes in. Okay. But with a blue team, red team, and a purple team, we're talking at advanced levels of maturity, right? So we're not talking about a simple V or a PT, which we've already covered. When a red team happens, what you want to do with a red team is you basically want to try and rattle every single control that you have. So whether it is your email gateway where you've got phishing protection, or your end user devices where you've got EDRs, or your DLP, you want to test out every single control that you've put in place with a very, very clear end goal. For example, exfiltrate a certain amount of data to prove that you can do it. Don't give me theoretical proof of concepts that there's an XSS. You show me what can you do with the XSS. Get into my environment, create a local user, reach my database, dump tables from my database, siphon off that data outside, and prove to me that you can get in, take data out, and maintain persistence.
Interesting.
Right. So that's your red team, right? But fine, you've done your blue team. Blue team, everybody does. They call it different things, but everybody does some manner of blue teaming. Red teaming organizations have started becoming aware of it, and they are inquisitive about it. What do you really want to do to close the loop is where purple teaming comes in.
Okay.
Right? Now, a red team activity will help you identify that things are wrong in your environment, in spite of the fact that you've implemented a lot of things. But what next? You can't leave those things hanging over there. That is where a purple team activity comes into play, right? Okay. So purple team, in my opinion, is nothing but an extension of a red team. So the red teamers come in, do what they're supposed to do, tell you what they did. You take that information, give it to your SOC team. Your SOC team has to understand that they tried 10 different activities. 5 of them were successful. They managed to get in. Did anything move in the SOC? Do we get an alert? Was a log created for this? Do we not have a rule, or was the rule missed? So they actually fix that. And then you actually go back and say, look, we've done this. Can we just try out? Can you work with our SOC team or detection engineering team to figure out that we've closed the missing gaps, which made us not detect what you were doing, right? So that's your purple team, right? So that's how I would classify blue, red, and purple. So blue is create the ecosystem, implement it, and test it. Red is attack it. Purple is after attacking, whatever your findings are, how do you actually close them?
Very interesting, and I like that concept of all the colors, and I thank whosoever have defined those colors. So my next question is, people also talk about let's say people spoke about the organization which is getting mature will do a vulnerability assessment. People also come on a stage of maturity who will do red teaming, purple teaming exercise. People also do breach and attack simulation. What's the difference between a red teaming exercise and a BAS?
That's a very good question. A breach and attack simulation is, as its name suggests, a simulation, right? But what it does is it tries to mimic attacker behavior on a system.
Okay.
So think of it as an assumed breach kind of a scenario. So you give access to a system and they will simulate certain commands which don't really harm the system, but they mimic behavior of a particular ransomware or a particular type of, like Mimikatz or Bloodhound. They're dumping Active Directory credentials. They'll mimic that kind of a behavior. You want to see if this behavior gets triggered in the SOC, right? A red team doesn't mimic. It does it. So it will dump credentials. If it finds a set of credentials, it will try and use those credentials or those tokens to actually gain further access. If it finds a database, it will try and dump data from that database and take it outside. It is not a simulation. A red team is the real thing, right? So now where do they fit in? When would you do a breach and attack simulation? You would do a breach and attack simulation where you want to test things out in production, but you cannot afford to have the I'm looking for a word over here, but you would do a breach and attack simulation where you do not want the uncertainty of your production going down, right? When you have a mission critical environment, and even though you want to test it out, but you cannot afford to have a red teamer come in and that remote 1% possibility that they try out and exploit and bring something down. So breach and attack simulation would be the first step. It doesn't replace red teaming, but it's a good way to sort of move beyond the penetration test side of things. Whereas if you do not have any kind of guardrails like this, then my suggestion is go ahead with red teaming.
That's interesting. So we've spoken about three concepts: VAPT, red teaming exercise, and BAS. What do you feel on the timeline perspective? Okay, let's say in an annual cycle, how soon we should schedule all these things?
So it depends on how the organization sort of structures its activities and how the maturity journey looks like. But typically the first starting point, assuming that you've never done anything, would be a vulnerability assessment. Sure. You do a vulnerability assessment or a hardening assessment. Whatever the findings are, you fix them and you do a retest. Typically do this once a year, twice a year, once every quarter, depending on how dynamic your environment is and how often you see changes. Once you've reached a certain cadence with this, you start off with penetration testing. My recommendation is at least do it twice a year. Right? Okay. Even if your environment is not very dynamic, there's still, you get patches from your operating system, your software gets patches, you create more users. So, your attack surface area is slowly but steadily increasing, right? So penetration testing, I would suggest you do twice a year.
Sure.
Red teaming, you do at least once a year. Sure. Once you've gone through a couple of rounds of VA, a couple of rounds of PT, that is when you should start evaluating red teaming, because you've sort of gone through a certain evolution and you've put certain fixes in place. You've got a certain amount of confidence in the controls that you have. That is when you try red teaming, right? And we at Cybernetics have interactions with customers who want to start off with red teaming, and we generally discourage that.
Oh, okay.
Because we say, look, we're fairly confident that if you start off with red teaming and you've never done VA or PT, then you're going to open up a can of worms. And it sort of, is not the right way, because you're starting top down, and that doesn't really work in cybersecurity, because you do want your foundations to be very strong.
Absolutely.
Right? So we do have those kind of conversations, and I think there's a little amount of unlearning and relearning that has to go out into the industry with this, and which is where I think this was a very relevant question.
Fair. And how we should schedule the BAS, breach and attack simulation?
BAS, in my opinion, is a good to have. Sure. If you're unable to do red teaming, then you can start with breach and attack simulation from year one itself. So go through, do a VA, do a PT, do a BAS. Right? So it sort of gives you, think of it as placebo. So if you can't do red teaming, do batch, at least you have a certain amount of confidence whether your
Sure.
SOC is able to detect certain things or not.
That's a great answer. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Great, Bhowmik. Thank you for coming for the at the show, and then love talking to you as always. Can you talk about your journey at CyberNX? How it started, how it shaped up, and what are you doing today?
Sure. So I started my career as a Unix systems administrator. It was very interesting because after the original time spent doing a lot of uh, ad hoc activities at a personal level, learning about cracks and learning about uh, piracy, if I can say that. These were the days of Napster, and you could download MP3s and e-zines and all of that. I sort of started liking this. It sort of fit my aptitude because there was a reasonable element of troubleshooting. Investigation. So that whole, you put yourself in a detective's shoes, and you're sort of trying to pick up clues and do things to reach to a solution. But when I really started my journey, cybersecurity wasn't really a formal stream of education. So except for in the US. And I eventually landed up in a course which was offered by the mathematics department, and where my major was cryptography. So I learned elliptic curve cryptography, quantum cryptography, RSA, SHA, and all of that. And transitioned. So when I graduated, I started working as a Unix systems administrator because I really liked the whole Unix
And
ecosystem
the complex way of doing
and the
it.
complex way of doing it. It was sort of like a challenge to myself. Can I do this? Can I not do this? And I sort of just evolved from there. So except for my first role, which was as a Unix systems administrator, I immediately transitioned into a security analyst, right? And at that point in time, security analyst meant a lot of different things. I was configuring firewalls. I was configuring Red Hat systems, Solaris systems, AIX systems, and configuring meant not just from a security perspective, but also from an optimization perspective. And the natural progression moved me into testing these systems for security. So I became what you would now know as a penetration tester, and it covered everything, not just web applications, but I would test servers, I would test switches, firewalls, web applications. Then I got into thick client testing, which was very interesting because I had to load up different executables or binaries into a debugger and sift through assembly code. So all of that sort of got me to a place where I had tried out a lot of different things in cybersecurity, and I had written exploits. I had participated in bug bounties. I had done accidental red teaming, if I can call it that.
Oh, really?
So penetration test, which sort of cross the fine line between a pen test and a red teaming, and eventually, because of a lot of what I did, I sort of landed up in a place where I had a lot more exposure to the business side of things. So
Sure.
as opposed to the technical side of things, and being from a Gujarati family, where it's always, I think जैसे वो बोलते हैं ना कि it is in your blood. So we eventually ended up in a place where I was very keen to start something on my own.
That's interesting.
Sort of explore the entrepreneurial side,
Sure.
and that's how CyberNX was born. CyberNX was something which is very close to my heart, and we sort of started off with a very simple. We started off with a very, very simple expectation that we want to offer quality cybersecurity services to customers within India.
Sure.
Overseas, there's a lot of maturity. India as a market has sort of leaped through a few things in the standard maturity journey, and the whole proliferation of access to internet, access to cheap internet, has sort of not allowed a normal user to go through, or even an organization to go through a journey where they realize the implications of not taking data privacy or their own online security very seriously, which is changing now, which is good. And there's a significant push coming in from the government and the regulators as well. So that maturity is sort of coming in, and I think we were at a very, very key transition point when we decided to start CyberNext. So me and a few of my peers, we sort of got together. We were brainstorming, nothing fancy. We were just bouncing ideas, and we thought, here's a gap that we could fill. And CyberNext started off as a cloud security services company.
That's nice.
And we kept on adding more services as we onboarded customers. We started offensive security services. We started a security operations center. We started risk and compliance. So, we sort of expanded to help customers with whatever phase of their cybersecurity maturity they are in, right? If you're a customer without any cybersecurity footprint, we can come in and help you. You're an advanced, mature customer with heavy regulator oversight, we can still come in and help you. We've got subject matter experts. We've nurtured and built a team which sort of works very well aligned with what is expected from a professional cybersecurity consultant. So we bring that value add to the table. We personally believe that whatever your tool landscape is, right? A tool is basically a means to an end. Right. So we're not fixated on tools. We adapt to what a customer has, and we try and leverage our skills and our expertise within that particular domain to help customers extract maximum value out of what they have. Right. And if they want to come to us for services, we are more than happy to sort of give them bespoke services customized to their specific industry, their specific requirements. So over the last couple of decades, I've sort of worn multiple hats, and then these days I try and deliver value to customers and scale a business at the same time.
That's amazing. Glad to know. CyberNext, I did not know this. Thank you for the explanation. It must be very encouraging for the next generation even to embark upon the journey what you have really gone through. Glad to know that. Yeah. Thank you, Bhowmik, for explaining the blind spot, the environment, right? So can we really summarize, how a company with having SOC as an outsourcing partner or in-house partner really work towards filling the gaps of these blind spots, and if they can further advance to the SOC to the next level?
Sure. So let me sort of break this into two parts. Part one is why do a lot of SOC environments be blind to certain kind of activities, and the second part is what can you do to sort of fix that, right?
Sure.
So there are 5 major reasons as I see it. Okay, the first one is visibility gaps. So it does not mean that you don't have your entire environment monitored, but you may not have your environment sufficiently monitored.
Sure.
Right? So that is where your threat modeling, which we spoke about earlier, comes into play. So you want to close those visibility gaps, right? Second thing is you want to cover your detections in the correct manner, right? So what do I mean by that? You may have Windows operating system logs coming in, but do you have sysmon logging and PowerShell logging enabled? Because those are very, very critical components to identify behavior of threat actors, right? So that is what a lot of SOC environments miss, primarily because of what you mentioned earlier. There is a huge volume overhang. There's so much volume of data being generated that you want to cut off things wherever you can. This is not that important. Let me leave it out, right? So that's the second part. The third part is alert fatigue. With this large volume of data coming in and a large set of rules present within your environment, they're bound to trigger, right? And personally, I don't feel there's a ratio to an analyst to a number of alerts which can be effectively handled, right? It all depends on how your environment is structured and what the skill level and the alertness of the analyst is. So alert fatigue plays a major role. Then what you're looking at is how do you actually test out your environment? So which is where validation using red teaming or or even breach and attack simulation comes into play. So you know that your SOC is not just a theoretical arena, that you sort of have it on paper, that I've got everything integrated, it should work. You want to test it out. After testing it out, the last major point is your feedback loop with detection engineering, right?
Okay.
So what you do in step number 4, when you're testing out your SOC with red teaming or breach and attack simulation, is you want to close that loop. Whatever findings were there which your SOC was not able to identify, you want to go back, work with your SOC team to create or tweak the relevant rules and make sure that they are aligned. So you have confidence that if something like this happens, then we'll be able to detect it. So these are the 5 major parts which I feel cause those blindness within your SOC environments.
That's very interesting, and I would love to take this feedback and go back to my organization to ensure that I really implement this. I don't want to be in a spot of blind spots, or let's say if I don't want to miss
Sure.
that SOC. Thank you for that explanation, Bhowmik. So that's a great explanation, Bhowmik, about summarizing the blind spots. Let me ask you this. If I go back, or if, let's say, for example, my audience goes back to the work, what are the takeaways and the next step they should follow like tomorrow?
Immediate action items. Ensure you have script logging, for example. Enable sysmon in your environment. Verify if your APIs, your DNS, and other peripheral environment are sending logs into your SOC.
Sure.
And check when was the last time you did some sort of a validation activity. You don't need to always go out for that. You can use publicly available tools like Atomic Red Team, or there are a whole bunch of different open source tools which you can use to run simulations. These are low hanging fruits that you can implement starting tomorrow without a huge impact on your team's ability to monitor or having to invest a large amount of time and money in this, right? So these would be immediate action items.
Sure.
But these immediate action items have to be complemented by a longer strategy. What are you really trying to achieve with this? That is where what you want to look at is pick your top 3 applications, top 3 high risk applications, perform threat modeling. If not applications, pick your top 3 environments and perform threat modeling on those environments.
Sure.
Look at the output of threat modeling and validate whether you've got the right visibility into this environment from a layered defense perspective. So if it's a public facing application, right from the internet down to the server on which the application is hosted, do you have visibility at each layer? Use threat modeling to identify that. Then use your activities like red teaming that you've already done and breach and attack simulation to sort of enhance your automated responses that you have in place.
Sure.
So your longer term strategy should actually be to move from a maturity level of 3 to 4 or to 5, where you reach a stage where a large part of your environmental alerts can be remediated in place without human intervention.
Very
Right?
interesting.
So your longer term strategy should be to leverage all of these immediate actions to get to a stage where you know your environment inside out and you're able to move it to an automated, like a self-healing
Sure.
kind of an environment. And that's but then again, it's not a point in time goalpost. You sort of have to evolve as your environment evolves. So you have to be mindful of that as well.
That's a great takeaway for me. Thank you, Bhowmik,
Sure.
for that. So we have learned from Bhowmik about how do you identify a blind spot, and we've also learned the graduality and the maturity level of that. So imagine if an attacker is at your doorstep, will you come to know? Will you be able to identify whether you can solve this issue or no? Comment in our section.
So your visibility has to move beyond EDR. If you're going to be stuck up on only using your EDR for identifying threats in your environment, you will always miss evasive behavior. The world has moved forward from signature-based detection. Your attackers and threat actors have also moved forward. They are using the cliched AI-powered engines to support their threats. behavior-based detection is the only way forward for you. A true next-generation SOC has to rely on behavior-based detection. Your perimeter is your most exposed area. Any asset living on your perimeter needs to be integrated with your SOC with much deeper, much more custom telemetry for you to be able to identify threats over there. Red teaming is good. I'm sure you're doing red teaming, but red teaming is not going to be enough. You have to extend your red teaming to purple teaming to actually be able to extract value out of that exercise and empower your SOC teams.
Thank you, Bhowmik. It was really wonderful listening to you and listening to your thoughts. It was really helpful for me to learn a lot of new things. I'm sure our audience would have noted a lot of learnings. I would urge everyone to please comment if you have learned anything new in this particular episode. Thank you, Bhowmik and CyberNex,
Thank you,
for
Fal.
coming forward and
Sure.
explaining the entire SOC blind spot as a topic. Thank you.
Thanks, Fal. Glad to be here.
Thank you.